Silent wealth, winning without being seen. Imagine an intersection in any European city on an ordinary Tuesday morning. In the left lane, a brand new luxury SUV, dealer plate still on, deep black lacquer, a recognizable badge. In the right lane, a 10-year-old Volkswagen, a small scratch on the bumper, a coffee cup on the dashboard. If I asked you which driver is wealthier, your answer is already ready. So is almost everyone else's. And here is where it gets interesting. In 2026 Europe, the statistically smarter bet is that scratched Volkswagen. The person in the luxury SUV is most likely gasping for air. The one in the Volkswagen is most likely free. So how did we get here? To a place where those who look the richest are actually the most indebted, while those truly building wealth go out of their way to look ordinary. That is what this entire video is about. Because looking poor turns out to be one of the most powerful financial moves a person can make. And the wealthy have known this for a very long time. Let us look at who is actually sitting in that luxury SUV. Because the picture is nothing like what the advertising wants you to believe. Household debt across Europe has grown considerably over the last decade. According to Eurostat data, a significant portion of Europeans spend nearly all of their income, and in many countries, the personal savings rate sits well below its historical average. What is even more striking, a notable share of high earners, those pulling in six-figure salaries, finish the month at zero. In Germany, France, the Netherlands, Italy, including people who appear to have it all figured out on social media. When you look at where the money actually goes, the picture becomes clear. Rent or mortgage, car, insurance, subscriptions, food, clothing. The sum of these nearly consumes the monthly net income of many middle-income households. The margin that remains is so thin that a single unexpected expense, a broken appliance, a medical bill, a plane ticket, can collapse the entire balance. Surveys show that the vast majority of Europeans cannot cover a €1,000 emergency from savings. And this picture has sharpened in recent years. There was once a segment spending freely and comfortably by choice. Now the segment spending out of pure necessity has grown and overtaken them, which means a large share of those shiny car payments are being made by people who are one missed paycheck away from a genuine crisis. Now, let us get to the real question. Why do we fall for this illusion so easily? Because reading status is one of humanity's oldest instincts. For centuries, these signals carried vital information. Who has resources? Who has protection? Who is worth aligning with? That instinct never disappeared. It was simply hijacked. Today, those signals are a car, a watch, a vacation photo. You are not really buying the object. You are buying a sentence you hope other people will say about you. This is precisely what economists call a Veblen good, something desirable because it is expensive, where the price tag itself carries the meaning. But here is the tragic irony. The people you are performing for are performing right back at you. Everyone is playing to an audience too busy with its own costume to notice yours. This cycle has a name in economics: hedonic adaptation. You bought the new car. For the first few weeks, you felt that spark. Then that car quietly became your normal. The spark faded, and you reached for the next upgrade just to feel the same thing again. The scenery never changes because you are running in place. And this treadmill speeds up as your income climbs. This is called lifestyle inflation. A raise came, and spending came with it. It grew, then nudged a little past it. The raise that should have bought freedom instead became a heavier stack of monthly obligations. The wealthy who stay wealthy notice these cascades early and refuse to start them. They understand that the most expensive part of a purchase is often not the purchase itself. It is everything that purchase quietly makes you feel obligated to buy next. Now, let us put a hard number on the real cost of looking rich, because the math is more punishing than people allow themselves to admit. In many European countries, new car prices have hit record levels in recent years. In Germany, France, Italy, and Spain, the average new vehicle payment runs between 600 and 900 euros a month. And that is just the instalment. Add insurance, fuel, maintenance, and parking, and the total cost of car ownership becomes the second largest expense in most households. On top of that, loan terms are stretching. 7-year, even 8-year car loans are no longer exceptional. They are ordinary. Meanwhile, the cars keep losing value throughout those loans. A new vehicle typically sheds around a fifth of its value in the first year alone. A few years in, the car's market value drops below the remaining loan balance. The person is paying interest on value that has already evaporated. If something happens to the car, the loan does not politely shrink to match. But the real loss is somewhere else. It is the calculation almost nobody runs before signing. What if you kept driving a paid-off used car and instead funneled that same 750 euros a month into a low-cost index fund? At a long-run average return, roughly 7% after inflation, that habit grows to over 100,000 euros in 10 years. Over 30 years, that figure surpasses 900,000 euros. So the real choice was never nice car versus ordinary car. The real choice was showing off now versus nearly €1,000,000 later. That number never appears on the window sticker. And this logic runs straight through the other biggest purchase most people ever make: the home. Buying more house than you need does not look like a single mistake. It multiplies everything beyond the mortgage payment. More property tax, higher heating and cooling costs, more maintenance, more insurance. And then the slow, invisible pressure to fill all those rooms with furniture, decoration, and equipment you feel compelled to buy simply because the rooms exist. What feels like one decision quietly becomes 12. The genuinely wealthy run that full calculation beforehand. That is why so many of them live in homes that are noticeably more modest than their net worth could justify. Now pause and consider this. As household debt across Europe has grown dramatically over the past decade, a meaningful portion of that debt is not for survival. It is to maintain an image, an expensive holiday, new furniture, a trendy outfit, on a credit card, paid off in interest installments. While those interest charges compound, every euro spent on them can never grow again. Underneath all of this sits a number that almost no one sees, because it is invisible by design: net worth. Income announces itself loudly. Net worth stays almost completely silent. And the gap between those two things is staggering across Europe as well. Research shows that a person's savings rate is a far better predictor of wealth than their income. A high earner who saves almost nothing ends up poorer in retirement than a modest earner who quietly keeps and invests a fifth of everything they make. The size of the faucet does not determine who is wealthy. What remains in the tank does. Once you absorb that, you start seeing your whole street differently. The house with a boat out front and 2 new cars in the driveway is no longer automatically the rich house. Maybe it is, or maybe it is the most leveraged household on the block. One bad quarter away from selling everything at a loss. Meanwhile, the neighbour who drives an old car, whose garden furniture has lasted 15 years, might be sitting on a portfolio that would genuinely surprise you. You cannot tell from the outside. And that is precisely what the wealthy are counting on. So what do the genuinely wealthy actually do? The answer is almost boring. And that is exactly why it works. Experian's research shows that most high earners do not drive luxury brands. Honda, Toyota, Volkswagen, the same cars. They can clearly afford the badge. They simply choose not to. The landmark studies of American millionaires, which remain relevant across the Western world, found something that still catches people off guard. The typical car buyer ties up around a third of their net worth in vehicles. Actual millionaires spend around 1%. Fewer than a quarter were even driving a current year model. They buy used, they choose quality, they drive it until it dies, and they rarely finance it. One writer compressed the whole secret into a single sentence worth memorizing. When people stop wasting money trying to look wealthy, they finally have the money to actually become wealthy. Now it is worth talking about a shift that is distinctly European, because silent wealth is no longer just a quirk of a few frugal millionaires. It has grown into a full cultural shift. Among the genuinely wealthy visible logos have started to read as insecurity rather than success. The new signal is the absence of a signal. A plainly cut, beautifully made coat with no branding. A quality watch only another collector would recognize. Status is no longer shouted downward to a crowd. It is whispered sideways to the handful of people who already recognize it. Within the middle class, the same strategy is spreading from a completely different motivation: practical necessity. The movement called underconsumption proposes using what you already own until it genuinely wears out, repairing instead of replacing, waiting with resistance rather than upgrading. The stigma around buying the cheaper option has largely collapsed. People proudly seek out the product that delivers 90% of the experience at a tenth of the price, then root the difference somewhere that actually grows. The result? Thousands of euros a year flowing not into the costume, but into portfolios. Which brings us to the single most important distinction in this entire video. Income is the flow of water from a faucet. Wealth is the water you actually keep in the tank. Someone can have an enormous faucet and a cracked tank, every euro going out as fast as it comes in, and look rich while owning almost nothing. Someone else can have a modest faucet, but a sealed tank, consistently keeping and investing a real portion of everything they earn, and quietly become the wealthier of the two. The luxury SUV signals a big faucet. It says nothing about the tank, and the louder and more visible the signal, the more often it is covering for a tank that is nearly dry. The genuinely wealthy figured this out long ago. They stopped competing on the size of the faucet, which everyone can see, and started competing on the size of the tank, which almost no one can. Looking poor is simply what a full tank looks like from the outside. But there is one more layer, and it may be the most valuable idea in this entire video. The deepest measure of real wealth is neither the tank nor the faucet. It is what the tank allows you to do. Call it optionality. Can you walk away from a job that is grinding you down? Can you step back for 6 months when a family crisis hits? Can you move cities for someone you love? Can you start a business without a guaranteed paycheck? Can you say no to money that would compromise something you believe in? These choices are what real wealth actually buys. And they are only available to people who have built a wide gap between what they earn and what they spend. Someone earning 200,000 euros a month but spending nearly all of it has almost no options. They are chained to the next paycheck, just with nicer scenery. Someone earning far less but living well below it has a freedom the high earner can only envy. Every flashy purchase is quietly a trade. You are exchanging future options for present appearances. Sometimes that trade is worth it. Far more often it is not. Let us make this concrete. Picture two people who started the same week, in the same role, on the same salary. The first one celebrated the new job by leasing the car that matched the title, signed for an apartment that stretched the budget to its edge. Every raise was met with a lifestyle upgrade. Every trend prompted a wardrobe change. From the outside, this person looks like the one who is winning. The second one kept driving the car they already owned, moved into a modest place, and quietly routed a fifth of every paycheck into investments before the money ever touched their checking account. For years, this person looks like the one falling behind. Then life does what life does. The company announces layoffs and both receive the same envelope on the same morning. The first one has almost nothing saved and a stack of obligations that do not pause just because the income did. They cannot take the next step without a safety net. They take the first job that calls on whatever terms it offers because the obligations never stopped. The second one has a cushion deep enough to breathe. They wait a few months. They turn down 2 offers that were not right and accept the one that was on their own timeline with their own leverage. Same salary the whole way through. Same city, same opportunities, same starting point. The only real difference is that one of them spent a decade buying the appearance of wealth, and the other spent that same decade quietly buying the real thing. That gap, invisible for years, becomes the entire story the moment the ground shifts. Once that clicks, the whole strategy stops feeling like sacrifice and starts feeling like a cheat code. So here are the concrete steps. The way the quietly wealthy seem to operate, translated into moves you can start using this week. Decouple your income from your identity. Lifestyle inflation is so dangerous because we treat a raise as permission to upgrade who we are. A bigger paycheck lands and suddenly the old car feels embarrassing and the apartment feels small. The wealthy interrupt that reflex. When their income rises, their lifestyle mostly holds steady and the difference flows straight into investments. A raise is not an invitation to spend more. It is a chance to widen the gap between what you earn and what you live on. Because that gap, not the salary, is the thing that eventually turns into freedom. The person who keeps living on last year's budget while earning this year's income is the one quietly winning. Make spending difficult and saving automatic. Willpower is a terrible long-term plan. It runs out at exactly the wrong moments, when you are tired, stressed, or scrolling at midnight. So the wealthy design their environment instead of trusting their discipline. They automate transfers into investments on the very day they get paid, before the money ever feels spendable. They keep only a small, deliberate amount in easy access checking. They delete the shopping apps, remove the saved card details, unsubscribe from promotional emails, and put a simple waiting period between wanting something and buying it. A short cooling off window, even a single day, quietly kills a large share of impulse purchases. Because the craving for an object, if you simply refuse to act on it in the moment, usually fades on its own. The mechanic underneath this is the closest thing personal finance has to a guarantee. Pay yourself first. Most people do it backwards. They earn, spend on everything that comes up, then try to save whatever happens to survive until the end of the month, which is almost always nothing, because life expands to swallow whatever is left. The wealthy flip the order. The investment comes out first automatically the instant the paycheck lands, and they build their life around what remains. Like a tax you never had a choice about. And because the contribution is automatic, they keep investing through the scary months as well as the good ones, which is exactly when it matters most. Drive it until it dies, and extend that same patience to almost everything you own. The fastest way to bleed money is to replace things that still work, either because a newer version exists or because boredom crept in. The phone still makes calls and runs your apps. It does not need replacing because a slightly better camera launched. The reliable car does not need trading in because the neighbor pulled up with something shinier. The wealthy define broken by function, not by feeling. Until something genuinely fails to do its job, it stays. There is a simple calculation that makes this concrete. Before any purchase, estimate how many times you will realistically use the thing. Then divide the price by that number. A €200 jacket worn twice costs €100 every time you put it on. A solid jacket worn 200 times costs pennies per wear. Run that math honestly, and most impulse buys collapse on the spot, while the genuinely worthwhile purchases reveal themselves clearly. Test before you commit, especially on anything big or new. So much money dies in the graveyard of abandoned enthusiasm. Closets and garages across Europe are stuffed with the gear of hobbies that lasted 3 weekends. The camping equipment, the camera, the instruments from the band that played one show. The wealthy treat a new interest as a hypothesis to be tested cheaply, not a reason to buy the full kit on day one. Rent the equipment for the first few trips. Borrow the tool before you buy it. Try the cheap version before the expensive one. Most enthusiasms fade after the first burst, and it is far better to discover that while renting than after you have furnished an entire room around a passion that turned out to be a phase. When the interest proves real, you will also know exactly what you actually need instead of guessing and overbuying. Define what enough looks like before the money arrives, not after. High earners get trapped because they never set a finish line. So every bump in income just shoves the target further out. They feel just as stretched at 300,000 as they did at 80. The wealthy decide in advance what a sufficient home, a sufficient car, and a sufficient life actually look like. And then let every euro beyond that point flow into building the tank. Someone who decides that a certain level of annual spending is genuinely enough and then goes on to earn well past it, builds wealth at a speed that looks almost unfair from the outside. The secret is not that they earn dramatically more. It is that they stopped moving the goalpost every time they got closer to it. Mute the comparison feed. A huge share of the pressure to look rich does not come from your real life at all. It pours out of a glowing rectangle showing you a curated highlight reel of people you will never meet, most of whom are performing a prosperity they cannot afford. You are not actually keeping up with the wealthy. You are keeping up with other stretched people who happen to be very good at lighting and angles. The genuinely wealthy tend to be strangely insulated from this, partly because they measure their progress against their own goals rather than a stranger's feed. You can borrow that immunity. Curate what you let in. Follow fewer accounts that exist to sell you a lifestyle. And the urge to buy your way into belonging gets quieter almost on its own. None of these moves are complicated. That is the entire point. The strategy of looking poor has nothing to do with hardship or denying yourself a good life. It is about refusing to spend money on the opinions of people who are not paying your bills and aiming that money at your own freedom instead. The scratched Volkswagen is not a symbol of struggle. To the people who understand the game, it is the calling card of someone who already won and simply chose not to announce it. Go back one last time to that intersection. The luxury SUV and the ordinary car, telling two completely different stories about success. You see them differently now. You know which driver is more likely free and which is more likely trapped. And you know that the gap between them was never really about income. The wealthy figured out a long time ago that the goal was never to look rich. The goal was to be free. And freedom is quiet. It does not need a badge, a logo, or an audience watching. It only needs you to understand the game well enough to stop playing the version that was designed to keep you broke. So the next time you feel that pull to spend money proving something to people who are not even watching, remember the Volkswagen. And remember that the richest move you can make is very often the one nobody can see.